We're real happy to be here. If you're not familiar with Associated Industries of Missouri, we're an employer organization. We were founded in 1919 to write the very first workers' compensation law. And so we've been around a really long time. After the first work comp law was written, we stayed together to try to lobby on employer issues, and that's what we do in the Capitol. We try to lobby on pro-business issues. So if there are issues out there that affect employers, we take the pro-business position. And if there are things out there that are going to hurt your business, we try to kill them. If there are things out there that will help your business, we try to pass them. And then we try to get ideas. And during the interim period, which is we're in right now, we go around and try to meet with groups like yours and figure out what we need to be doing in the Capitol and what we need to be promoting. You saw Representative Scott Fitzpatrick was here earlier. He's a good help to us in the legislature. And he's doing the same thing. He wants to hear from you what your ideas are, and then he goes up there and tries to get them passed. We try to help him do that by talking to other legislators and trying to get them to see what the advantages are of passing pro-business legislation. This, I have been doing, give you a little background about myself. I had a background at the Department of Revenue. I worked at the Department of Revenue for 16 years as a tax guy, boo. But I spent the last 11 years of that experience working in the legislative group, which worked with all the tax laws that were being passed. So from 1987 on forward, I've worked with all the tax laws that have really passed the General Assembly. In 1998, I left and worked for a statewide employer organization. And since then, I have worked on behalf of taxpayers. So I'm kind of like Saul of Tarsus. I saw the light, and now I'm on the taxpayer side of the equation. But I've had something to do with all the tax laws that have passed since '87. So I've had 27 years of working with the legislature, and in that 27 years, I've seen a lot of changes, including going from a complete Democrat-controlled environment with a Republican governor to the complete opposite, with a Democrat governor and Republican-controlled legislature. And it's a very different environment today. These days, it seems to be easier to get pro-business things through the legislature, and then you have to worry about the governor vetoing things. Where in the old days it was like you're trying to fight things that the legislature was trying to do, and you always had the backstop of potentially the governor vetoing the legislation. So it's changed a lot over the years, but that experience has shown me that there are even people that you may not think are business friendly because of their party tag. That's not necessarily true. There are a lot of Democrats who have very pro-business ideas. There are a lot of Republicans that you may think are pro-business that aren't. So you have to watch everyone, and you have to talk to everyone about what their real beliefs are. And I would encourage you to do that when you're thinking about supporting candidates. But this was really a historic session. For the first time in nearly 100 years, we passed a tax cut bill and actually got it enacted into law that affected every taxpayer in the state of Missouri. Last year, we passed House Bill 253, and this was a tax cut bill. Please go on and eat, because your food's going to get cold. Go on and eat. I won't be offended. We passed a bill last year, House Bill 253, that was a very good tax cut bill. Unfortunately, we mixed in it some things that the governor asked us to put in the bill, and those things were the reason that he vetoed them. We mixed in it some things that involved internet sales taxes and other things, and part of those changes that he asked us to put in the bill actually bracketed out some things that were very important, like the prescription drug sales tax exemption for senior citizens and disabled people. That's a very important exemption, and we took the language that they gave us, and it turned out there was a bracket that was placed 3 words to the left of where it needed to be, and that did away with the prescription drug sales tax exemption. Nobody noticed it till after the bill was passed. The week after it was passed, the governor came out with a press announcement saying that this bill would have done away with that exemption and used that as one of the reasons to veto it. Because of that and other reasons, we weren't able to get the override votes that we needed to override the governor's veto, and that bill was vetoed. So we started this year with a very clean tax cut bill. In this tax cut bill, we kept everything else off of it. It was a very pure tax cut bill. We sent that to the governor, and the governor vetoed it. We did that early enough where we had a chance to override the governor's veto during the legislative session so that we didn't have to go through the summer of campaigning and then, go to September with a veto override session like we did last year, because that was pretty laborious for us over the session last year, over the summer last year. And we were able to get the governor's veto overridden because there was one Democrat that crossed party lines and voted with the Republicans. Keith English voted with the Republicans and voted to override the governor's veto. So as a result, we now have the first tax cut that affects every taxpayer in the state of Missouri except for C corporations. Oddly enough, the only group that is not able to take advantage of the tax cuts in the tax cut bill are C corporations. But every other business in the state, 95% of the businesses in the state are organized as something besides a C corporation. So if you can think of businesses that you know, or if you have a business, most of them are S corporations, LLCs, LLPs. They are something besides a C corporation. They will all get a tax cut under the bill. All the individuals in the state will also get a tax cut under the bill. And low-income people get an additional $500 exemption if they make $20,000 or less under the bill. The bill has a series of triggers in it that require an additional amount of state revenue, so it protects state revenue. The amount that is spent by the bill is about $124 million a year. The bill requires at least $150 million in new revenue growth before those tax cuts become effective. So each step, it's divided into 5 steps. Each step costs about $124 million. Each step requires $150 million in new revenue growth. So it's all paid for out of growth in revenues. So when you hear people say, well, this is going to take out, this is going to hurt education or this is going to hurt state services, that's just not true. It's coming out of the growth in state revenues. A good example, this last year we would have tripped the trigger because we exceeded the previous revenues by $400 million. So we would have met the $150 million minimum by a whole bunch more, but we would have only spent $124 million of that $400 million. So that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. There's additional money that's going to be there. So that bill passed. The governor vetoed it. We were able to override his veto. And what it does, each step, as I said, it has those triggers in it. Each step would lower the individual income tax rate by 0.1%. That doesn't sound like much, but when you get to calculating your individual income tax, you'll see that it's a little bit. And after you hit the 5th step, it amounts to a 0.5% cut in the individual income tax rate. What's significant about that is it's the first time we've ever gone down. Individual income taxes have been fairly stagnant for a long time. They've never gone down. So this is important. From a business standpoint, we're really excited because the business income deduction that's in the bill is something that came from one of the meetings I had with one of our members in Lee Summit, Missouri. I was meeting with one of our manufacturers there, Bennett Packaging, and Kathy and Doug Bennett. They're an S corporation. And I was meeting with them, and they said, we like what you're doing for C corporations because we've done franchise tax cuts and other things for them. But they said, what you do hasn't done anything for us because we're an S corporation. And so I had the idea of trying to establish some kind of a business income deduction that would focus tax relief for those businesses that report taxes on their individual return. That's the way we came up with to do it, is the business income deduction. It was an original idea that we had. Missouri was the first to try to do it. We first tried it in 2011. It didn't pass that year, and we've tried ever since to get it passed. Since then, 2 other states have adopted it, so they got our idea and passed it, but now we finally have passed it into law. So that tells you how important it is for you to think about what's good for your business and let us know, because your ideas can become law, and that's what's happened with this bill. What it does is each step, as I said, 0.1% cut in the individual income tax and a 5% business income deduction. By the time we get done with the 5 steps, you'll have a 0.5% cut in the individual income tax and a 25% business income deduction. That means 25% of the business income for 95% of the businesses in the state you'll not have to pay state income tax on that amount. That's important for our state businesses. It's really important in this area and areas that are close to the Kansas border because Kansas completely exempted all income tax on S corporations and all those flow-through type entities. And when you're competing for jobs and competing for businesses in this area, that's something you're having to compete with. A lot of the legislators were saying, especially in the Kansas City area, oddly enough, were saying, oh, well, we don't have to worry about what Kansas did. I'm afraid you do. And it is something that those of you who are in economic development know that does come up when you're talking to companies, and they know they can locate just a few miles on the other side of the border and they don't have a tax liability. So thankfully, we have something to at least allow us to compete a little bit with what Kansas has done. So that was our big bill. That passed a week and a half before the end of session, and we got that veto override, and we were really happy about that. But we had a whole lot of other stuff that passed in terms of taxes as well, or that we were trying to get passed. So we had a lot to do that last week and a half, and we've just come off of that. So if I talk really fast, that's the reason. And I've got a handout for you that I'm going to give you after we're done, so you can look at this afterwards. You don't have to take great notes. But one of the things that we did, we had, and I was talking with Representative Fitzpatrick about this, one of the things that really became apparent and was a big theme this year was trying to rein in the Department of Revenue. Now remember, I used to work for the Department of Revenue, so I know how they operate, but the Department of Revenue has really gone off the rails, and this last year, I think taxpayers had finally had enough. The Department of Revenue had gone after dance lesson instructors, people that have exercise facilities, and they had gone after them and audited them and hit them with big tax bills saying that they should have collected sales tax on the amounts that you pay to go and work out, on the amount that you pay for dance lessons, and things that really shouldn't be subject to sales tax. And they hit a particular business in Springfield with one of these big assessments, which fired up the legislators there, Representative Eric Burleson and Senator Bob Dixon, and they filed legislation to rein them in on that amusement and entertainment type tax. So we thought, okay, that's great, because that's an area that's needed to be addressed for a long time. The Department of Revenue has been back and forth on that issue, and this would be good to address that. Well, then we started hearing from other taxpayers. They had there was a provision on refunds that they weren't following the way that they should have, and they were denying refunds to taxpayers that had paid the improper amount of tax to the Department of Revenue. They were saying they couldn't get their money back. Well, that was wrong, so we needed to fix that. So there was refund language that needed to be passed. And the list goes on and on. We have them all listed for you. So we made a big package of these things that needed to be addressed. There were exemptions that they were not reading correctly. There were things that we thought should have applied, that exemptions that should have been granted under the existing law that weren't. Data centers, for example. We think that data centers should have been entitled to the same exemptions that manufacturers have now, because the law actually says that it extends to processing. Well, isn't data processing? You would think so. The Department of Revenue said they weren't so sure, so we had to clarify it for them. So we had to put that in the bill. So we ended up with this nice big package of items that were just trying to make sure that the Department of Revenue read the law the way we thought it should have been read. Cancer treatment drugs and devices. You would think that those would be exempt. All of your medical supplies, pretty much all of your medical supplies, prosthetic and orthopedic devices, all of your prescription drugs, all of those types of things are exempt from sales tax already. But they said no, this device that helps stop the growth of cancer tumors was not exempt. So we had to go and tell them yes, it was. So again, nice big package of these things. We worked them all into that bill that had been filed by Senator Dixon. And that's in Senate Bill 584. And that did pass in the final hours of the legislative session, Senate Bill 584. That's a big bill. It has a lot of items in it, but we think it's important, and it all follows the same theme. It's just trying to get the Department of Revenue to be a little fairer with taxpayers. The governor, in his post-session news press event, came out and talked about some of the items in the bill and talked about how the legislators had gone on a spending spree, and we just don't agree with that. What they were trying to do is trying to rein in the Department of Revenue and get them to be a little fairer with taxpayers. So that's what that bill does. We also designed it in a way that if the governor vetoes the bill, which we suspect he might, that we probably will have the votes to override the governor's veto. So be aware of that. When you get this, you'll see the list of items that are in there. There were other bills that we did that helped shift the burden of proof from taxpayers to the Department of Revenue. That's in 584. It's also in some other bills. We had done that several years ago, but at the time, the governor didn't want to shift it. A different governor didn't want to shift the burden of proof for larger businesses, and didn't want to shift it on certain types of transactions. We took all of that away. Now it'll shift. The burden of proof will be on the Department of Revenue to prove that you owe additional taxes if they say that you do. We think that's fair. You should be innocent until proven guilty. So just fairness issues. And that was the bulk of what we got passed in the tax department this year. There were several other things that were really more focused. I don't know how much you really care about focusing on taxes. There were some other bills that we did regarding bonding. There are $600 million in additional bonds that will be issued for capital improvements on state buildings around the state. That's going to be important to those places that are able to secure those improvements. In transportation is important to all of us. And you may have been following in the news, we tried to get a joint resolution passed to put before voters a 1% sales tax for transportation. That got narrowed down to a 0.75% sales tax. What that means is about $5.4 billion in transportation funds that could be used to fund transportation projects. That has to go before voters. Voters have to approve it. We've been supportive of letting voters make that choice as to whether they want to do that or not. You know in this area how important it is to get goods in and out, and how important that is to business. If you don't have a way to get goods in and out, it can stifle your business. It can also ruin your chances to attract a business to Missouri. So we think it's an important thing to do, to have a good transportation infrastructure, and this is something that is a choice for voters. You know, a lot of people said, why don't you do fuel tax? Well, all of us know, with the price at the pumps now, even though gas can jump 10 or 20 cents at the pump and we hardly blink an eye anymore, if you put that on the ballot and say, do you want to raise the fuel tax by 10 or 20 cents? What are people going to say? They're going to say no. And so we've polled this, and they seem to settle more on sales tax than anything else. We'll see what they say. I have to tell you, it's going to be an uphill struggle to get people to vote for that. People are pretty much taxed out, I think. But that is, if you're going to vote for any kind of tax increase, that might be the one to vote for. We also did some stuff. There was a move, and you may not have even been aware of this. There was a move this year by the Department of Agriculture to just very subtly change one of their rules and allow gas stations to use E15 gasoline, which is ethanol 15% and gasoline 85%. And use that in pumps without really telling you what was in the formula. And the corn growers loved it, and love corn growers. But we thought you should tell people, because if you have a vehicle that's older than 2006, it can make your car not run right, because those vehicles were not built to run anything higher than 10% ethanol. 10% ethanol is what's in our gas now. And so if you had anything that was 15%, it could cause them to not run right. So we thought you should at least let consumers know that that was in there. There was no requirement that they would let you know. So we fought that rule, and we lost that fight. There's a bill that passed that at least says they have to make a rule that says that they will put a label on the pumps and let you know that the gas contains E15, which we think is a responsible way to handle it. So that bill did pass. We think that'll be signed into law. In the HR area, there were a couple of bills that passed that I think are very good bills, and you probably, if you're in HR, you'll probably agree. Last year, Senate Bill 28 passed regarding unemployment, and that was a bill that tried to tighten up the definition of misconduct. If you're in HR, you know that most of the rules for unemployment are set at the federal level, so we don't have a lot that we can do at the state level on unemployment. But one of the things that we can do is define misconduct. Last year, the bill that defined misconduct went a little bit too far. It said that if someone did something outside work time, that you could deny them unemployment benefits. The Federal Department of Labor said that that went too far. It went outside what the federal guidelines were, and they even said that it could deny Missouri employers their federal unemployment tax credits if that were to be signed into law. The governor vetoed the bill. And so we went back to the drawing board. We have almost identical language, but we included an extra statement this year that does comply with the federal law. And so now we have a very tight definition of misconduct that's passed in Senate Bill 510. It is able to be signed by the governor. It will not endanger our federal unemployment tax credits. It does comply, according to the Federal Department of Labor, with the federal law. And it will help tighten up some of these cases of people that are getting unemployment that shouldn't be getting unemployment. So that's Senate Bill 510. There was also Senate Bill 673 that passed this year. That's a good bill too. What it says is when the unemployment rate drops, the number of weeks of unemployment will drop with it. Right now you get 20 weeks of unemployment regardless of the unemployment rate. This would ratchet that down as the unemployment rate drops. Because theoretically, if the unemployment rate drops, there should be more jobs out there. You shouldn't need unemployment for as long. And so this would help tie those two together a little bit. We think that makes sense as well. That's Senate Bill 673. So those two bills passed this year. There was also a bill. How many of you that are employers use the shared work program or have used it in the past? Okay. There was a threat to that program this year. The feds changed the shared work program, and if we didn't adopt the federal changes that were made, we were going to lose the shared work program in Missouri. So we worked with other business organizations to try to get this passed, this language that had to pass in order to keep the shared work program in Missouri. Unfortunately, there were a couple of senators who didn't quite understand the program. They thought that it allowed employers to game the system. And for those of you who don't know what it allows you, instead of laying off one person, it allows you, for instance, to lay off 10 people 10% of the time. So you're able to keep your experienced employees working. It's a very good program, and it has the same exact impact on your unemployment as if you had laid off one person. Each of the people that you've reduced their work hours, they get a small unemployment payment, and it has the same impact on you as an employer, as I said, as if you'd laid off one person completely. So it's a good program. It allows you to keep people working, and it allows you to keep your experienced employees tied to the business. And in many cases, I think the employees like it as well as the employers, because they know that could have been them that was laid off. So it works well for the employees and the employers. Some of the senators weren't quite understanding the fact that there isn't any way to game the system any more than there is under the regular unemployment system, even though we tried to explain it to them over and over again. So we would go and explain it to them. We think we had them settled on the issue, and then we turn around and they would have another problem with it. So we got the bill, Senate Bill 844, out of the Senate, got it over to the House. This is Senator Dixon's bill from Springfield. Got the bill out of the Senate, got it over to the House. It contained a provision that was exactly like the feds had said we needed it to be, which actually increased the flexibility of the program. Right now you can use the program for, I think, 20 to 40% of the work hours. This would have changed it to 10 to 60% of the work hours. So we were excited about that. It would have made the program more flexible. Some of the senators objected to that. They wanted to bring the bill back to the Senate and change it to the exact same as it is now, 20 to 40%. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to go on and just pass the bill, because once it's out of the Senate, we could have passed it in the House and been done with it. And unfortunately, there were some people that listened to the senators. They sent the bill. They sent the bill back to the Senate with the amendment to reduce it to 20 to 40. They adopted the amendment, and so now it is exactly the same program that we had before. But we do have the changes that were made to make sure we comply with the federal program, so at least it will continue. We will go to work, though, next year trying to expand it so that it's more flexible now that the feds have allowed that, because it's been a great program for our employers. And we think more flexibility will allow more employers to take advantage of it. Senate Bill 844 was that bill. How many of you care about environmental legislation? I won't spend a long time of it. Okay. There were a couple of bills. Our biggest problems with environmental legislation really come from the federal level, but we did a couple of concurrent resolutions here at the state level to try to tell the congressional delegation that things that involve coal are very important to us here in Missouri. This matters to all of you, whether you really have a focus on environment or not. We get 82% of our electricity right now in Missouri from coal-generated power plants. And the EPA has issued some very strict regulations on new power plants. So new power plants that are being built are not going to be able to use coal. It's not going to be economical for them to use coal anymore. They're going to have to use natural gas. And so any new power plants that are built, the electricity coming from them is going to be more expensive. Now they're in the process of designing regulations on existing power plants, and they're trying to ramp down the use of coal in existing power plants. Fortunately, they have to work with the state departments of natural resources. In Missouri, that's the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, to come up with an implementation plan on those regulations. So we at least have some state say in how those regulations roll out. There were two concurrent resolutions that passed, HCR 30 and HCR 38, that tell our congressional delegation we want the EPA to work with our state Department of Natural Resources, and we want them to be heard when it comes to those regulations on the existing sources of electricity. There was also a bill, House Bill 1631, that says that we want the EPA to look at each individual power plant when they're designing the regulations rather than looking at the state as a whole. There are some power plants that have taken steps to add pollution controlling equipment that helps reduce their emissions, and we think those should be allowed to continue. If there are others that have not, then they can address those. But we think if they have taken the steps to make their coal-burning facilities cleaner, then they should be looked at differently than those that have not. And so that's House Bill 1631. I think the governor may sign those bills. So those did pass in the, and be watching, because those regulations that are coming from the federal level are going to be very important if they, and there's no way really to stop them. Our Congress has kind of lost control of the EPA. They don't control them because they don't really pass federal budgets anymore. The president pretty much runs the EPA, and even he has lost control of the EPA, in my opinion, even though on this issue they're listening to him. But you know, look for that. When the EPA comes out with those regulations, it's going to raise our power costs. The EPA has estimated that these new regulations will raise your power rates by 6%. If you're a manufacturer, start figuring out how much that's going to cost you. If you're a consumer, figure that into how much you're going to pay extra. And it's 6% for, you know, what are you going to get for that 6%? I'm going to throw it open, I think. There are some other miscellaneous issues that we were involved in. Oh, here's one. This is a good one. And Representative Fitzpatrick had a piece of this bill, HJR 72. I don't know if you heard about it during the campaign that the governor waged against our House Bill 253 last year when he was flying around the state talking about how harmful the bill was going to be to education. But he talked about withholding money from education. In our Constitution, we allow the governor to withhold funds if the state revenues are not enough to pay for all the things that the legislature has appropriated the money for. We have that there because we have a balanced budget in Missouri. So you have to have that. Pardon me. You have to have that to allow the governor to control the amount of money that's spent if revenues aren't as much as we think they're going to be, because the budgets are prepared a year in advance. So you don't really know how much money is coming in. We never intended it to be used as a political game. And lately, not just this governor, other governors have used it too, as a political tool. And we don't think that's right. We don't think that people really think that's right either. So HJR 72, Representative Fitzpatrick worked with Representative Richardson, and they designed this bill that says if the governor withholds money, then that decision has to come back to the legislature, and they get a chance to override that decision. Right now, if the governor vetoes a spending item, that decision comes back to the legislature, and the legislature gets a chance to override that decision just like they do every other bill. The governor has the ability to veto individual spending items. That comes back to the legislature. They can override that decision. But they can't override a withholding right now. And this would go to voters and ask them if they want to allow the legislature to override the governor's withholding. Let me tell you why that's important. This really came to a head this last year, not just on our bill. There was a technical center that the legislature put an extra amount of money to pay for this technical center in the budget. The governor got the line item and vetoed it. So he sent that back to the legislature. The legislature overrode the veto, sent it back to the governor withheld the money. At that point, there was nothing that the legislature could do. So think about that. The people have elected the legislature, and they believed that it was necessary to do this, so they put the money in the budget. The governor vetoed it. They overrode the governor veto, which takes 2/3 majority. That means there were Democrats that were voting for it too. And it went back to the governor withheld the money. That is kind of an abuse of power, we think. And we think that people need to have a chance to say if they want that decision to go back to the General Assembly again and have them have the chance to override it. That's what it's about. HJR 72 is what that is. And that does bypass the governor, so he doesn't get to decide whether to sign that one or not. That'll go to voters in the fall, HJR 72. Thank you.